Rain drummed softly against the kitchen window, the kind of steady rhythm that usually soothed Ethan after a long day. But tonight, the sound grated on his nerves. He sat at the small oak table, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling between his hands. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. She was late again. Claire had texted him hours ago, "Working late, don't wait up." A simple message, the kind she had sent dozens of times before. And yet tonight, something about it gnawed him. Maybe it was the way she didn't include a heart emoji, or the way her words felt rehearsed. He tried to read, to scroll through the news, to distract himself. But every minute stretched like an elastic band, taut and ready to snap. He kept glancing at the driveway through the rain-streaked glass, waiting for the familiar sweep of headlights. It was nearly 12:40 a.m. when he finally heard the hum of her car. He stood, not sure whether to pretend he'd been asleep or to greet her at the door. By the time the thought resolved, the front door opened and Claire stepped inside. Her hair was slightly damp, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked radiant, in that way she often did when she came home from work dinners, brighter somehow, lighter. "Hey," she said casually, brushing raindrops from her coat. Ethan forced a smile. "Hey, late night?" "Yeah, the meeting ran long. You know how it is." She set her purse down and walked past him toward the kitchen. And that's when he smelled it. Not her perfume, at least not the one she usually wore. This was sweeter, heavier, and not something he'd ever noticed on her before. It clung to her coat like a whisper. Ethan's stomach tightened. "New perfume?" he asked lightly. Claire paused for just a fraction of a second, but he caught it. That tiny hesitation, like a skipped beat. Then she smiled. "Oh yeah, one of the women at work gave me a sample. You like it?" He nodded slowly. "It's different." She laughed softly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Go to bed, Ethan. You look tired." And just like that, she disappeared down the hallway, leaving him alone in the kitchen with the rain and the smell of something unfamiliar hanging in the air. He didn't follow her. He just sat back down, listening to the water hit the glass, wondering why, after 20 years of marriage, a single scent could make him feel like a stranger in his own home. Ethan stared at the dark hallway long after Claire vanished into the bedroom. His coffee was cold now, bitter and unwelcoming, but he drank the last sip anyway, more out of habit than thirst. It wasn't always like this. 24 years ago, she'd been the kind of woman who could make a room hum just by walking into it. He'd met her in the university library, of all places, where she'd been pretending to study but was really sketching little flowers in the margins of her notebook. She looked up, caught him watching her, and instead of looking away, she'd smirked. They'd talked for 3 hours that night. 2 weeks later, he was already sure she was the love of his life. Back then, every touch felt electric. They'd stay up late in his cramped apartment, eating cold pizza straight from the box, her feet in his lap, the world outside their window nothing more than background noise. He'd thought they'd always be that way, so connected, so unshakable. But life had a way of sanding people down. Bills, deadlines, responsibilities. Somewhere along the line, the laughter turned into polite conversations, and the kisses became quick, functional gestures before rushing out the door. Still, Ethan believed in her, believed in them. Even when her late nights started, even when she stopped answering his calls right away, even when her eyes wandered to her phone mid-dinner. He'd told himself it was stress, work, maybe she was just tired. But tonight, with that unfamiliar perfume still ghosting in the air, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Fear. Not fear of losing her exactly, but fear of what it would mean if she was no longer the person he thought she was. The creak of the bedroom floor snapped him out of his thoughts. Claire was moving around, drawers opening and closing. He hesitated at the doorway, then stepped inside. She was at the mirror, removing her earrings, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. "You're still up?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the glass. "Couldn't sleep," he said, thinking about us. A pause, then that soft, careful smile again, the one that didn't feel quite real anymore. "We're fine, Ethan. You overthink too much." Maybe she was right. Or maybe, after 20 years, he was finally starting to think just enough. It happened the following Thursday. Ethan came home earlier than usual, rain clinging to his coat, the streets outside wrapped in that damp, metallic smell that only a late autumn storm could bring. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Claire's car wasn't in the driveway. He hung his coat, tossed his keys into the bowl by the door, and noticed her purse on the kitchen counter. Open. That alone was unusual. Claire guarded her belongings like a hawk. He wasn't looking for anything. He told himself that later, when he'd replay this moment over and over in his head. His hand moved almost without his permission, brushing aside her wallet and sunglasses until he saw it. A folded receipt. He picked it up. A hotel. Not the kind where you booked a vacation. This one was the sort you rented by the hour. He knew because it was only 20 minutes from his office. The timestamp was from yesterday afternoon. 2 hours paid in cash. His heart punched the inside of his chest. 1,000 explanations sprinted through his mind, each one more ridiculous than the last. Business meeting? She got lost? She was helping a friend? But as he stood there in the kitchen, staring at that thin slip of paper, the quiet around him felt heavier than the rain outside. The sound of tires crunching on wet gravel pulled him out of his trance. Her car. Ethan slipped the receipt into his pocket just before the door opened. Claire stepped in, shaking her umbrella, her hair slightly damp. She smiled when she saw him. "You're home early," she said, her voice bright, almost too bright. "So are you," he replied, and for the first time in years, his words weren't entirely true. She didn't notice, or maybe she did, and simply chose not to answer. Dinner was supposed to be simple that night. Roasted chicken, a bottle of red wine they'd be saving since last Christmas. Ethan sat at the table, watching Claire move between the stove and the counter. Her movements were fluid, practiced, like she'd done this 1,000 times. But tonight, he wasn't looking at the way she chopped vegetables or stirred the pan. He was watching her face. Every blink, every twitch of her lips, every time she avoided looking at him. He waited until the wine was poured, until the chicken was on their plates. Then, without any warning, he slid the folded receipt from his pocket and placed it beside her fork. "What's this?" His voice was calm, too calm. Claire glanced down, her expression not changing right away. Then she gave a short laugh. "A receipt? Obviously." "From a hotel," Ethan added. "Yesterday." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down, fingers delicate, controlled. "I met with a client. The cafe we planned to go to was full. The hotel restaurant was quiet." Ethan stared at her. 2 hours, Claire. She met his gaze now, her eyes hardening. "Do you hear yourself? You're keeping track of how long I sit in a restaurant?" "Don't turn this around," he said, his voice cracking just enough to betray the knot in his chest. "I'm not," she said flatly, pushing her plate away. "I'm telling you that if you're going to start acting like a jealous teenager, maybe we have a bigger problem than where I eat lunch." The room felt smaller. The warm scent of roasted chicken now seemed suffocating. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, to demand every detail. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, and took a long drink of wine. They finished the rest of the meal in silence. The chicken was perfect. Neither of them tasted it. 3 days passed. 3 days where Ethan replayed that dinner over and over in his head, like a scene from a movie he hated but couldn't stop watching. Claire was warm enough, polite enough, but there was something gone. The way she touched his shoulder in passing felt mechanical, rehearsed. Her laughter came a beat too late, as if she had to remind herself to act amused. On the fourth night, he came home early. He wanted to surprise her, maybe suggest they go out, try to shake off the tension. But as he opened the apartment door, the faint sound of her voice floated from the bedroom. It wasn't just her voice. It was her voice lowered, softened, threaded with that tone he remembered from the earliest days of their dating, when she'd talked to him on the phone until 2 a.m. He froze in the hallway. I can't tonight. He's here," she whispered. Then silence. Ethan stepped into the bedroom doorway. She was sitting on the bed, phone still in her hand. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she smiled, sliding the phone screen down onto the blanket. "Hey," she said, voice perfectly casual. "You're home early. Who was that?" "Work." The answer came too quickly, too smoothly. And here it was, the moment. The perfect moment to demand the truth, to rip the mask off, to make it all real. But he didn't. Instead, Ethan nodded, as if her single word had solved everything. He walked into the kitchen, opened a beer, and stared at the wall. That's when it happened. The first deep crack. Not from her lies, but from his silence. Because in that silence, he realized, he was letting her destroy him piece by piece, and he wasn't stopping her. From that night on, Ethan started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The receipts in her purse. The way she sometimes came home smelling faintly of a cologne he didn't wear. The extra 30 minutes she couldn't quite explain between leaving work and walking through the door. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he became a quiet collector of shadows. He started keeping a drawer in his office at home. Not locked, but only he ever opened it. Inside, a napkin from a restaurant they'd never been to together. A movie stub with a date that matched the night she claimed she was visiting her mother. The business card of a hotel tucked inside a book she'd left on the kitchen counter. Every item felt like a stone in his chest. Every night, he'd open that drawer, look at them, and tell himself he needed more. Not because he wanted proof, but because some part of him still needed to be absolutely certain before he tore his life apart. Claire remained her radiant, untouchable self in public. Friends envied them. At dinners, she would lean on his arm, laugh at his jokes, and hold his hand. And yet, when her phone buzzed under the table, she would slide it into her bag without even glancing at the screen, her smile never faltering. It was almost impressive, he thought, how easily she could be two people at once. And somewhere in the middle of his quiet investigation, Ethan realized something far darker. He was no longer trying to save their marriage. He was building the case for its execution. It was a Friday evening, cold and windy, when Ethan decided to follow Claire. He parked his car a few blocks away from the downtown cafe where she said she was meeting friends. His heart hammered in his chest, equal parts hope and dread. Maybe tonight was the night he'd catch her red-handed. He watched as Claire stepped out of her car, dressed impeccably, hair shining under the streetlights. She smiled and greeted a man, someone Ethan didn't recognize. They hugged briefly. Then the man slipped his arm around her waist. Ethan's breath caught. They walked inside together. For 20 minutes, Ethan waited in the shadows, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. Then Claire came out, alone. The man? Gone. His phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Had to leave early. Something came up. Sorry. Ethan felt a wave of crushing disappointment and relief. He wanted to storm inside, demand the truth. But instead, he sat back in his car, staring into the dark, wondering how long he could keep pretending. Days passed. But Ethan couldn't shake the image of Claire and the stranger. The weight in his chest grew heavier with each passing moment. He stopped trusting his own thoughts, caught between hope and despair. One night, alone in their bedroom, he stared at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in a storm. Claire entered quietly, sensing his turmoil. "Ethan," she whispered, sitting beside him, "I know something's wrong. Talk to me." He wanted to tell her everything, to spill out the fear, the hurt, the betrayal he suspected, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he shook his head. "I'm fine," he lied. She touched his hand softly. "Don't push me away." He looked at her, torn. For a moment, it seemed like they could bridge the gap, if only he could forgive and forget. But inside, Ethan knew the truth. Something between them had already broken.